I want to announce the teams. In opening government is Park is dobe Jure. In opening opposition is resistance is futile. In closing government is Daree A. And in closing opposition is WURST. Speeches, as before, are 7 minutes in length, with the first and last minute protected. And with that, I want to announce and call upon the first speaker for the government to open the debate.
Testing.
Me čujete svi ovako, a? All right, can anybody hear me like this? Cool. Right. Mr. Speaker, it is very unfortunate that we abandoned the Yugoslav identity so fast. As the country was falling apart, our beloved federation, we discussed the ideas of it being an asymmetric federation, a confederacy, a sort of international union, but there was an idea to sort of preserve this identity that we've been building for 50 years through broad tiers, communal work, and many other things that brought us together. Unfortunately, we had a war, this ideology broke down, and we started rebuilding our own identities through war and denial. We are that which they are in terms we are Serbs because we're not Croats. We have a cunning plan to fix this. That's the good news. And we think we're going to use sports as a means and vessel of reigniting the idea of a Yugoslav identity. We're not proposing that we're going to live in a state together like before, but we're going to accept the idea that we have dual identities. We are not simply Serbs, Croats, Bosnian, Macedonians. We are Serbs, Bosnian, Croats, Macedonians, and Yugoslav somewhere on a different level. I think this is very important because this is going to end the idea that we define ourselves through the hatred of our neighbors. We also think that this is going to stop poisoning the narrative we have for our future generations, where we hand them nationalism in one of the most innocent of forms, and that is sports, because we believe that children love sports, and instead of learning love of the game and respect for their opponent, they actually learn hatred, because it is here in sports where the worst of the nationalism is entrenched and wages war by other means through sports. I would like to talk about 4 things. 1, what does sport mean for the fans? 2, how do extremists use this as a weapon and a means to wage war? 3, why we believe that a new identity will be born, and how in the many countries that are divided, sports was actually the vessel of creating a common united identity. And finally, why we think that Yugoslavia as a concept was abandoned, as an identity was abandoned too fast. First of all, when we talk about sports, sports is a means of us defining ourselves as a group, in terms of that this is an effort that we do together, and this is also an effort where we gain usually huge self-respect, which is why when Serbia plays basketball against the United States, it's the clash of the 2 most giant titans in the world. We might not have their economy, we might not have their geography, we might not have nuclear weapons, but God damn it, we'll beat them in basketball. This is where we stand united as a people, and we have our self-respect, because we may not know how to build planes, but we can play football. This is where us as individuals and even from young to old build our together national identity. That once when we stand together, we can be as strong as any nation that can face us on the playing field. This is why we propose that all sports teams of all former Yugoslav republics should have a unified mixed team of all nationalities. So Slovenia, Bosnia, Croatia, Macedonia now have one team that represents them in international competitions: basketball, football, volleyball, water polo, etc. That is going to be based on meritocracy. That is going to be based on who plays the best. We are sure that politics is going to play part in who gets chosen for the team, but you cannot choose an old Serbian football team if you're deciding to build a unified sports team. And we do believe that meritocracy is going to be seen, viewed, and rewarded in this system. Before I continue on why is sports very important for extremists, I will take opening.
What will their hymn be, and will they all be forced to sing it?
Well, actually, that's a pretty good idea. We can skip the hymn from now on. We think that it's very more important to have a unified national team than to have a hymn. We actually think that the team and the sports that you play is more important than the song that you sing. We find evidence of this is that many Serbian football players don't even know the words to their new hymn. So, when we are at the stadium and we're playing football against Croatia, for example, if we're Serbs and playing against Croatia, we have many nationalists who bring flags, who bring trumpets, who bring drums, and then they yell, "There is the enemy." They point a finger to a specific group and then identify that they are the ones we are fighting against. This is how they garner support, because once we have a clear and identified enemy, then we start to galvanize ourselves as a group. This is how extremists use sports as a means to wage war in a situation where we are not fighting directly. Thank God for that. But still, they're creating future animosity, and we have seen many violence in football games, other sports venues, but we've also seen this rhetoric of hatred between republics that keeps being perpetuated through generations. It's like when you're a young kid and you join a football fan club, and all of a sudden you see that there's this rampant racism and chauvinism, and this is how the group defines itself. We are Torcida because we hate Partizan. This is why we think that if you have mixed groups, it is very then hard to pinpoint who exactly are we fighting. And this is where these extremists lose their ability to identify a certain common enemy. We also see that once you play together with a certain group, you build a common identity. We've seen in the South African Republic that once blacks and whites have been integrated into the same rugby team, we have seen that they have a new identity built out of it. They've seen that they could be as equals and that they could be friends and allies, that they could fight together against Nigeria, Tanzania, or whoever they were playing at the time. We believe that this is again possible to happen with our new fans and in our new sports team idea. Because ultimately we believe that there's a significant number of fans who do actually love the sport and love to be represented and love to be powerful and win and share that identity with the team. It also means that they like to reward meritocracy in terms that they would love a foreign national who plays for their team if he is a good player enough, which is why in many international teams, if we look at Europe, often enough we'll see people who have took the citizenship of the country but are culturally from a different background, but have been accepted as their own because they play together in order to achieve a common goal. Finally, we believe that this will help rebuild the idea that there is a Yugoslav identity, that we are after all, culturally very similar. We think this is very important because if we look at the future and if you look at politics and economy, the countries of the former Yugoslavia have really nowhere else to turn except to each other. We have the common language, common markets, common culture. We think that it's going to be beneficial for all of us if we have a good narrative and dialogue in the future, that we can now communicate on the same level, not because we just have the same language, because we also have the same identity. In fact, we have seen through language how we try to invent differences between us simply to rebuild this identity. We do believe that we have managed to create separate identities other than the Yugoslav one, but we don't see why we couldn't have both identities implemented together. This is why we believe it is easiest and best done through sports, because it brings people together fast and effectively. Because for our future and our children, we want to live in a world that is more integrated and more respectful to each other. We ask you to vote for our proposition.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd like to call upon the first speaker for the opposition.
Okay. Good to be here. Thank you for having me here. During my speech, I would like to have 3 points of rebutting on Victor's speech about how great it would be to have us all united again, unfortunately, which is not happening. And secondly, my second part of the speech will be 2 arguments from the first opposition side. First, telling the same story, similar story to Victor's, how actually that does build the cultural and national identity of those states, and why is that important to have, especially when we're talking about former Yugoslavia. And the second point will be talking about clean practicalities and what's happening when we start moving those teams around the Balkans, claiming one place as a place of training, what's happening with those people who will be training at different places in different situations and not their countries per se. So firstly, Victor started his speech saying that it will be awesome to accept the idea that we all have dual identities and that we will be trying to collide with those taboo of history that are trying to bother us and still bothering us today. And that we are being defined through hatred. That's all really, really nice. But we must remember one thing, and that is the fact that during the 90s, Yugoslavia fell apart because we all wanted autonomy. Meaning that once we have Yugoslavian unified teams again, that means that all of those countries, all of those people who actually wanted to have the autonomy, to be a part of independent states, are put in a situation that A, they didn't want, B, they're supporting someone who is not theirs because they cannot put themselves in the situation that they, as a part of independent country, for example, Croatia is supporting a Yugoslavian national team, not feeling as a Yugoslav person, but feeling as a Croatian. In that moment, he doesn't have the team that he can actually put himself in that shoes and understand what's going on and to actually build and be the part of that national identity. The identity which is being actually forced on him to accept is something that is not his, especially when we're talking about something that made him actually want the autonomy, want the independency during the 90s. So no, we won't be able to accept the ideas of the dual identities, maybe be even worse, because in that situation you'll have all those people accepting only independency, only autonomy, and being split at the same place, still pointing fingers and saying that guy who actually missed the goal was Serbian. If we had our Croatian national teams, that won't be happening. First thing. Second thing which we heard is the fact that when we define the enemy, we will all be galvanized as a group, and that will be really awesome and totally cool. It won't magically disappear. If that was the tool of actually solving the hatred in former Yugoslavia, and if that was actually the solution of all the taboo of history problems, we would be using it now. But we know that at first glance, when something inside of those teams happens, somebody points a finger at someone else, or somebody mentions something connected to the history, all of the others will react, and we'll still be pointing fingers. It won't go away just in a couple of years or a couple of decades, perhaps, that we all stay together and act as a Yugoslavian team. We won't, because we will still be Croatian playing for the football team of Serbia, which also has Bosnian people. And the only thing we can only talk about, that the mere fact of pointing fingers and naming those persons is still a problem. And I'm guessing that the government is trying to deal with that, but they're not dealing with that properly. So that, and also, the third thing was, no thank you, the third thing was, the thing about rebuilding the idea of Yugoslav identity, which I merely said and explained, that it is awesome. It's really nice to have like those attempts to try to solve Yugoslavian history and put it on some better foots. But also, nobody is asking those people, do they want that? And we don't want to be the one who are risking the situation in which those people are not feeling comfortable, and then afterwards not having something that they can understand and they can feel warmer towards you, and then maybe even making those conflicts even deeper and deeper and deeper because there was something that they didn't want at the first place. Go.
On this point, if you think that this is the only problem, it's basically a technicality, and that in theory it's a good idea, then don't you agree that when they start winning, because they're going to be better funded teams, that this is going to disappear, this problem?
It won't disappear, because there will still be parts of different countries playing for one team, which was the reason of them gaining their autonomy and making the hatred happening at the first place. So it's not something that will be like the tool of organizing their awesome new communities and brotherhood and unity and everything else. So that was from rebuttaling. Points of the opposition. Firstly, the factor in building national identity. During the 90s, when Croatia got separated from Yugoslavia, we had our constitution during the 92 year. That was fine. But the second thing that we implemented was Croatian national football team. And that was the first factor which was actually totally cool and normal for Croatian people. That was the first factor which they said, I love this because now I feel as I have my country, I have my identity, and this is the person who is representing representing me. Not the government, not the constitution, not the anthem. It was the Šuker, David Šuker, Davor Šuker, whatever it's called. I really suck at this stuff. But he was the guy who was actually the symbol of Croatian respect. And also, as Victor mentioned, it is a feeling of respect. And in that moment, it's really important to have those people who respect their country, who respect their representatives, and who feel warm and obliged to love their country. And I know that's nationalistic, but still, that's important to have their cultural identity. In the moment when they cannot do, no thank you, when they cannot do that, we have a serious problem, because in that moment, they will be totally conflicting the Yugoslavian national team because they don't have the feeling of respect towards their country anymore. B, we're creating some foundations for maybe future Yugoslavian problems to even more develop, especially first time when Serbian football player from the Yugoslav team that does a mistake and the Croatian fan react because, oh my God, that's the Serb guy. No, nothing like that would happen in the national Croatian team. So firstly. Secondly, for those people, the attempt in word autonomy means really a lot. That means something that brought them better life afterwards. We're not saying that Yugoslavia was a bad idea, but we also have to say, and we have to point out that those people were the ones wanting the autonomy for their separated countries. And really, it's not a good idea to go back to Yugoslavian story to actually open those wounds again, especially on something which is really, really delicate territory, because that something is what they see as their representatives. And we don't want to risk another Yugoslavian civil history happening again. Okay, and secondly, the whole mere practicalities, which will be also elaborated by Nika even more, is the fact that once when we send Croatian, Bosnian, Slovenian, Macedonian, Montenegrin teams to, for example, Belgrade to train, some people will still have in their faces the situation when you're during Yugoslavia, Belgrade was one of the capitals, one of the strongest places in Yugoslavia. And in that point, those people going there won't feel very warm because that's not their territory. B, they won't be able to know who are they playing for. They won't be able to actually see themselves as a representative of something because that's not their soul, that's not their state. And they don't have fans there who are actually supporting it in that matter. We do believe that it's way too early to deal with something like this. We do believe that it's important to preserve the national cultural identity, especially when it comes to that's a representation of this country right now in this status quo situation. And also, we don't want to face the situation in which we have Yugoslav national teams fighting between themselves. Because, for example, now, local stuff and local football fans fighting with each other are the problem, not international fighting teams fighting against each other. So for all these reasons, we beg you to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, and I'd like to call upon the second speaker for the government.
It is an honor. I have 3 points of rebuttal and then 3 more points of constructive. It's going to be a long one, so bear with me. 1 point of rebuttal. Stella talks about how Croatian scoring is going to fuel nationalism within the 6 republics, former Yugoslav republics. And we see that this, on the face of it, sounds plausible, sounds logical. But what we also see is that when a Serbian football player passes the ball to a Croatian player to score, we see that the message broadens into not the Croatian person scored, but the team scored. And the team scored thanks to a common identity, a common working together. Now, what happens, why this happens, is that on the field, it's all about scoring the goal. There are no identities individually. This is what the first thing that a sports coach tells you when you're in a team. It's not about you, it's about the team. It's about us winning. So we don't see a Serbian football player not wanting to pass the ball to a Croatian player who's standing in the perfect position to score. We see him doing it instinctively, thereby creating exactly the sort of thing that we want on the side of the proposition. Of course, Slovenia, the faithful gatekeeper as always. No, thank you. Now, the second thing is about sports, and the proof of how this actually happens is when Novak Djokovic was once mistaken for a Croatian on a tennis tournament, he wasn't offended. This was one of the greatest moments of Serbian-Croatian togetherness in recent history when he said it's all the same thing. He wasn't offended. It was covered by the media extensively. It showed a great promise for a better future, and it showed that we can accept each other regardless of national identity. This is exactly the thing that we're talking about in sports, right? This is exactly the thing that we're going to talk about a little bit more about. Then Stella tells us about how when they come to Belgrade to train, this is going to be a huge problem because it was the central place of the federation. True, but we think that regardless of what or not Belgrade does have today the best, and I think it's highly doubtable that we have the best sports halls and the best sports fields. They're going to train everywhere. I've heard that Slovenia has some very nice mountains and some very nice places for them to train. So they are going to travel all around as sports teams usually did in the past when there was Yugoslavia. They are going to train everywhere because they are a national team because of it. But furthermore, I'm concerned that Stella doesn't feel at home here in Belgrade, since she has come and debated in this city for a long time. Croatian debaters have won in this hall, which is supposed to be the seat of nationalism if this is a nationalist state. And yet they have always been welcome, and they have always shown that on the field of battle, which is the debate, let's say, and as a sport, they are equal, if not better. This is what meritocracy does, and they've proven to us time and time again that we can be equal and that we can talk about things and communicate and cooperate. This is what we are talking about. And we think that by having the third thing about rebuttal, when she says about, having a common state, we're not talking about having a common state altogether, right? We're not talking about political cooperation in that form. But we do feel that once we are outside in the real world, we are sort of culturally similar. We do have similar histories, just as the European Union has a similar cultural milieu, and therefore they are more likely to be, talking to each other, just a second, Stella, rather than people who are outside of the EU. They're more likely to understand each other on a level that goes beyond talking. And this is the same thing that happens in the Balkans. We are more likely to understand each other. This is why debaters outside on Worlds and Euros always talk to the people from the former Yugoslav Republic rather than people from other countries, and always rather drink with them. Stella.
We're not saying that we're creating a new state or new country or whatever. We're talking about the fact that those people don't want to be at any point part of Yugoslav identity again, and that's why they have their separated countries right now.
Fine, but Yugoslav identity is only a word. We can talk about a regional identity if that is your problem, right? We think that a regional identity does exactly the same thing and shows if you're allergic to Yugoslav. I have no problem with it. I have no desire for having the old Yugoslavia back, and I doubt anyone here has. Well, maybe from individuals. Thank you. Thank you, Slovenia. Now, three things that I want to talk about in my constructive is about this dual identity and how we need to build it on positive influences, not on negative influences, right? And I'm going to use a very plastic example. Germany and France, inside the European Union, are two countries that fought 2 world wars and have been fighting for a long time before that. They are seen as competitors for a long time. But once the European Union came, and they had to talk things out, they had to create a common identity as Europeans, and this is exactly what the European Union does. No, thank you. They were forced to talk to each other. They were forced to overcome their differences and then talk about having a common cultural identity. It is exactly this common cultural identity that we are trying to build here through sports. We think that sports is an excellent vessel that we can have because it has high media coverage and it has things that don't relate in any way to cultural identity. It's all about scoring, and this is what we talk about here. It's all about the culture of respect. It changes the narrative of these states, just as the campaign Say No to Racism in British football did. It changed the narrative. It changed the perception of black people in football and in society. This is exactly, no thank you, what we are talking about here. Having a positive identity, not a negative one. It's not about who, it's about us winning together, not about we won and Croatia lost. This has been a major problem where hooligans were banned. For example, the latest thing is were banned for going to a football match in Croatia for possibility of riots. This is like what we're talking about. Now, having positive role models. I remember being a kid, and I'm a little older than Stella, so I remember this guy called Darko Pančev in the Red Star team. When he won, even though he was a Slovenian, when he scored the winning goal in the penalties, this was a huge momentous occasion where later on I could not comprehend people who saw Slovenians or Croatians as enemies, simply because one of my role models, and kids are exactly the thing that we're talking about when creating a new national identity, was not Serbian, was Slovenian. This is a huge thing to do. And exactly they're going to win more since they will be better funded. It's all about meritocracy, so having a bigger pool of sports people is going to create a better national team, more wins, more likely to beat America, more likely to have these things, right? And of course, there is this idea of familiarity, right? If we are more in tune with something, if we have more communication, if we are more familiar to something, to an idea, to a person, then the acceptance of new ideas, of different ideas becomes more relevant. This is what happened with gay pride parades in Serbia, because exactly at the time when you said that there actually are gay people, which was news to a lot of people in Serbian society, on the streets protesting, it bred more acceptance to the idea of having more gay people or having gay people at all. And because of all of these reasons, we beg you to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd like to call upon the second speaker for the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about is the reasoning behind why the first government isn't really using examples from former Yugoslav republics, but rather examples from the European Union, etc., etc. We believe this debate is basically debate about why Yugoslavia fell apart, and we're going to prove to you that the logic and the principle the government is proposing is the same one that caused the problems in the first place. Now, I will firstly talk about these ideas about common identities or plural identities and the difference between identities and origins. Secondly, I will talk about how cooperation builds up and what is the perceived logic behind these teams working together. And then I will talk about the issue for whom they are playing. Because we do not believe that this is a practicality, we believe that this is a values issue, this is an issue discussing what the fundamentals of why sport is important are. Then I'll move into how these practicalities then turn into values that are being proposed, and why this is extremely bad in a situation that is filled with conflictual motivation, which is the situation of sports where the passions are high, etc., etc. Now, let's start with identity and origin. We do acknowledge that we have a regional or Yugoslavian, Shula, call it whatever you like, but there is a common origin in the countries from this area. However, we also acknowledge that the identity that the people have themselves decided to build is a national identity connected to specific states. This does not mean we do not have some sort of common origin, but it does mean that if the people are making the choice, and they sort of made their choice about what the identity should be, it should be a national one. Now, over-national identity can only make sense if it's not conflicting with the national identity. However, we believe that the Yugoslav identity, in some of its aspects, the one you're proposing, is conflicting with the national identity. I'll move further on in this. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are fewer Yugoslavians than Eskimos in Croatia at the moment. So more people claim that they're Eskimo than Yugoslavian. In Croatia, I think the statistics are similar for Serbia, and this is a pretty good illustration of the fact that the people do not want a Yugoslav identity, yet the government wants to force them by giving them a common sports team. Now, moving on to the idea of cooperation, Šule, the idea of cooperation only functions if I have the idea that we are a people moving towards a goal that betters all of us. However, if I have the feeling that my Croatian player is passing the ball to the Serbian player so that the Serbs could score the goal, because we all know Serbs always took the most important acting roles and the biggest sports positions, right? That's the discourse. That's the discourse we have been given. So if this is the part of my discourse, then the idea is not cooperation. No, you're actually feeding in the discourse of the poor Croats being abused by the evil Serbs during the entire time of the Federation of Yugoslavia. So we don't believe you've proven this. Now, moving further on about the practical, how practicalities turn into values. No, after this substantive. How practicalities turn into values. What Stella tells you is like, look, where are these people going to train? What will their hymn be? Will they be forced to sing this hymn? What will the flag be? These questions aren't practicalities, they're symbols for identity. So every single symbol you can use will be colored heavily or less heavily by us being a regional identity. Unless what you're actually proposing is that we should call ourselves a banana state and ignore the origin you claim is the base for us having a common identity. So when these issues come into question, when these issues of the practicalities come into question, then we come back to the reason why Yugoslavia fell apart in the first place. Everybody was complaining. The Slovenians were complaining they're the only ones doing the highly technical job. The Croatians were complaining the Serbs are taking all the money. The Serbs were complaining that we're not really functional well enough and that they have to deal with all of our problems, etc., etc. And this translates into the idea of a common sports team. We as nations believe that we're better on our own. The Slovenians have a higher ranking of Olympic medals compared to per capita, per number of people in country, than they did in the time of Yugoslavia. We don't think this is that important, but the Slovenians apparently do, because we all decided to move into a more national discourse. You had a question. Yeah.
The thing is, this is a progressive notion. Progressive ideas rarely are popular, such as gay pride parades in non-progressive societies, but they are still right and should be implemented because it's the only way for society to move forward.
Okay, I get it. The problem is that the whole basic principle why sports will work is that sports are popular. So the effects in sport will be popular, therefore there will be an effect. However, we don't believe this is the case. Now let me explain why. Why doesn't Serbia let Kosovo compete in sports competitions, right? Because they have a claim that the Kosovo is that they have a claim, and will not discuss whether that claim is right or wrong. I will simply state that they believe that having a sports team representing is a strong signal of national identity for Kosovo, and they do not like this. Now, this is another thing showing you how we want to be identified with our national groups rather than an overly national. My second question, this is why we raised Kim. I don't know the name of the guy, but apparently a member of the Serbian representation refused to sing the hymn because he is Muslim and was threatened to be kicked out. Now my question to you is, if this is a symbolical value, what happens at the first instance one of these people claims that the symbol is the symbol of another nation and a sign of oppression? And this is my last constructive. We believe that this is extremely harmful, especially in this surroundings that are filled with conflict. Because, Mr. Speaker, sports raise people's spirits up, right? Passions get high when you play sports. People tend to fight when you play sports. In fact, even international groups like Partizan or Crvena Zvezda fight together. In fact, we think they fight sort of more than with the Croatians, but that's a different issue. So people raise their passions up. Now, we believe that in a situation that is conflict-prone, and these situations are conflict-prone, the second someone claims you are oppressing me, or you are moving me more towards an identity I have refused and I have bled for, or bled for the opposing identity of this, we believe that in that very instant, this turns into a bloody riot. So what you're basically proposing is a timed bomb that might work if you would pick people who aren't sports players at all, who are very well-trained politicians who will just hug each other and exchange t-shirts on the field ground. But the second a single national player claims, A, this group or this other group is basically using me for their interest, B, the symbol they want me to use is something that's heavily national colored and it's not nationalistically colored for me, or C, they are just basically bad guys. We believe that that instance, we basically sparkle riots. We have seen that we have failed on an over-national level. The opposition might not be happy with it, but these are the facts. We fail as Yugoslavia. Please don't make us fail even more and prolong bloody conflict. We beg you to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. I now want to welcome the third speaker for the government to open the debate for her side.
One second. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the proposition here is living in is living in a world where, in the 1990s basically, they're ignoring all the progress that we have done as independent republics, all the progress we have made and all the reconciliation that has taken place. And they have misunderstood our motion completely, because for some reason they're under the impression we're going to revoke their passports, we're going to make them a same nation again, and we're going to start all these wars and all these atrocities and all that again. And we don't understand why they have taken such an extreme view. And basically, in my case extension, I'm going to elaborate on the fact that with our motion and by making these unified teams, we're basically going to have more investment, more funding, more development in all these republics, which are going to remain independent, I repeat. Basically for two reasons. Firstly, because sports is a huge money industry, and we think that basically when we're a united team, we're going to start doing a lot better, like we did in the past. We're going to start excelling in sports again, and basically we're going to get funding and sponsorships again, and also because it's going to create a much better image to the world. Because right now the world, in many ways, is still seeing us as someone who fights and who cannot work along together and cannot be united, and we're going to disprove them in this assumption. Now, before I go on to my case extension, I would like to engage in some rebuttal. Now, basically what we have heard consistently from their side is that people do not want this. You know, these independent republics do not want this. So essentially, they're conceding to our point that this is a brilliant idea and that the only problem is these technicalities and the fact that people do not want this. Well, what we're saying is when these teams get united and when they start doing better and people start cheering together and seeing that they actually have more things that unify them rather than separate them, that this is going to be fixed. So we can fix this technicality if they do concede that this is a good idea, which essentially they do. Secondly, I think there's some historical inaccuracies. Now, I'm in no way an expert on Yugoslavia, but I have written a paper or two, so I'm guessing I know something about it, and I'm Serbian, so I guess something, you know. Basically, as far as I know, yeah, okay, they didn't really like each other. Yes, we did have a civil war. Yes, it wasn't that nice. But I don't think that it's nice to presume that no one had a Yugoslav identity. We have places like Bosnia and Herzegovina, which had a lot of intermarriages, and where people did, and some still do, have this Yugoslav identity. And let's face it that, you know, we do in many ways have a similar culture, a similar language, a lot of things that unite us. All we are saying as this side is that let's bring light, let's shed light onto these similarities in the nicest possible way, and you know, with sports, through sports basically. And we also think that nationalism and key figures like Milosevic and Tudjman and so on, I don't want to get into these details, that they had a key role, and it wasn't just the people who hated each other and couldn't stand each other. So we believe that in many ways we can revive this identity in this small way, I repeat. Furthermore, some of the points, you know, oh, I can't read this. Anyway, never mind. The whole thing about the identity and identity, I want to repeat that we're not going to revoke anyone's passport. We're not going to make anyone become a Yugoslav again. You can be a Croat, you can be a Serb, that's fine. We still want this. All we're saying is let's work together in this, because we know that united, you know, united we stand, divided we fall. It's a nice saying, and I think it works in this case. And basically, we're going to see huge improvements. So it's a very small way which can have huge effects. No, thank you. Huge benefits, which we want to, you know, which we want to take advantage of. And then finally, this whole idea, you know, that there's so many conflicts and, you know, oops, I missed a page. Oh, sorry. The whole idea with the hymn, you know, what hymn are they going to have? I don't care if they sing the Simpsons theme song, ladies and gentlemen. This is not the point. They can make their own hymn if that's the thing. It's just a technicality. I don't even care where they're training. We can solve all these. And finally, I don't see the relevance of this Kosovo issue. I mean, Kosovo is still a debated, still a hugely debated topic, which isn't recognized by a lot of the countries, by the UN, like Russia and China and so on. So I don't see how this is relevant. As far as I know, Croatia, Slovenia, and all these countries are recognized by everyone, so we're safe on that. Oh, and yes, before I go on, you know, this idea that, you know, hooliganism is bad. Yes, it is bad. And we think that this is the problem when, you know, a Croatian team is fighting with a Serbian team. We're trying to tackle this. We will tackle this because under our motto, they're going to have a unified team, and they're going to start cheering together. They're going to have similar interests for once in some small way. They're going to see, look, we want this team to win. We both want this team to win. And we think that this is brilliant. Now, on to the point about basically investment. And I told you that sports is a big money earner. So basically what we're saying is we believe that these teams united are going to do better, just like they did in the 1990s and before. So we're going to get more sponsors. We're going to get more funding into things like soccer fields for our kids and tennis fields and basketball and so on. And we love these things. We love these development. We love to have, you know, green soccer teams around, and we think this is going to be great. These are important, you know, changes to the social environment to have these amenities in all these republics. Secondly, we see that as soon as we start seeing eye to eye in this way, and you know, start cheering together, you know, drinking the same venues, whatever people do when they're watching a sports game, and see that they have similar interests. Basically, we're not only going to have more, in a minute, cooperation on an individual level, but also on a corporate level in the long run. You know, we're going to have more investment for Slovenian businesses, and so on. You know, we're not just going to have Mercator here, we're going to have other Slovenian and Croatian companies in the long run, and we think that's brilliant. And lastly, the image we're going to give to European Union and to the world. Now, Yugoslavia is still unfortunately perceived by many as this this place where there were a lot of wars and atrocities, where people can't stand each other. People to this day still ask me, oh, you know, can you be a friend with a Croat or something, which I think is ridiculous. But the fact that people are still thinking about it means that this is how the world still perceives us. Now, if we tell the world, no, look, we can have sports teams that are united because we can understand that we have similar interests and we can work together, we think this is brilliant. We think this is in the future going to improve our tourism. You know, more investment, more working together. Even with the EU, it might help some countries that are still seeking membership and worried that if these countries join the EU, are they going to be able to work together? This is a small step that's going to show them, yes, they are. They are going to be able to work together, and they're going to do so well. So for all these reasons, we proudly beg to propose this motion.
Thank you very much for that speech. And I'd like to call upon the third speaker for the opposition.
Apparently it's someone's birthday. That's nice. Thank you, Harish, for on the floor. Now, we've heard from proposition consistently that the goal here is more communication, better cooperation, because they believe, wrongly, that having one football team or having one single identity for different states will somehow actually work in solving the problems that we are facing today in former Yugoslavia. Now, before I'm going to explain to you why actually it's very harmful to destroy national symbols, because national symbols have important uses. I'm also going to explain why it's actually necessary to have these national symbols for cooperation and communication, and why we need closure. Before that, I'll go into the rebuttal of the rather minor extension of second proposition, namely that there's going to be more money. Well, we believe that even if there's going to be more money, it's a very, very, very marginal benefit, and we don't actually believe that it's worth giving up all these very useful national identities and symbols. Secondly, we don't actually believe there's going to be money, even if we assume that, but we don't actually believe there's going to be more money, because it's going to be like giving pocket money to another person's child. You don't do that. You rather fund your own child. So we don't think actually that's going to work that well. Now, on to my substantive. I'm going to start off with a bit of a quick analysis on what nationality actually is. Oh, I've got my stopwatch. Basically, what is nationality? Yeah, we believe that basically nationality is an extension of the most fundamental societal forms that we know, namely tribalism and kinship. tribalism and kinship. Nationality is an abstract of your tribe and your kin, and you identify with your with certain national traits because such as languages, cuisines, and historical traits, because you share the history and all these things, and therefore you identify with the nationality that you perceive to belong to. Now, Prop might say this is all constructed, right? And we can reconstruct it, redefine it. We say this is actually nonsense because the national traits are actually powerful because we believe in them. They're not tangible. They're something that only gain power because people willingly believe in them. And this is exactly why you can't impose national identities. In the EU, for instance, we've actually seen that even with institutional unity, which was actually achieved before gaining national identities, before gaining any kind of European identity, even with that sort of institutional unity, all the symbols that were later imposed, like a flag and a national anthem and a currency and all that, don't actually do a thing to create a national sense of identity, because it's simply not believed in by the people. And that is exactly what Proposition is trying to do. What they also try to do is going to take away emotionally powerful national symbols. And football teams are some of the most, and sports teams in general, some of the most powerful national symbols that you have, and replace them with artificial symbols. It won't work. There's no emotional connection there. And it's because there's no emotional investment, there's no natural connection that people have. So the fundamental reason why national symbols actually work is actually taken away. Meaning, basically, the reason why national symbols work is because meaning is given by an irrational belief in these overarching connecting traits. And we believe actually that these emotional this whole overarching entity and this national symbol is very important because, well, let's see, what did I write here? Yes, basically, we believe that it's actually very useful. There are several useful benefits to this. First of all, being part of a large, clear group is actually very nice for your self-identity. If you believe that you belong to a certain group, it actually strengthens your self-identity. People like a sense of belonging. It's basically like being in a big family. And it makes people happy. But moreover, actually makes gives people pride and a sense of strength. And this is absolutely necessary for two reasons. First of all, because we are dealing here with states that actually haven't been around very long. The institutions of the new states still are in turmoil. We still see that these states are trying to define what they exactly are and how they're actually going to function. And so we actually need this very strong identity because it is the glue that keeps states functioning and together and developing in these very difficult times. And the national identity is actually exactly what's useful for this. If you take away the national identity for these individual states, what you actually take away is the very glue that holds these states together. And you use it failingly for something that doesn't actually need it because there is no need being given apart from more communication and cooperation by second prop, which is not going to work to do this. And we see this actually going to be very harmful to take away this national unity. Yes.
But you can still have more than one identity. You can have a German identity and still feel German, and you can have a European identity and not let the European Union fall together because of the crisis.
No, this is actually not what happens, because what we see, and this is actually leads exactly into my second point, because what we actually see is that these countries that are still struggling together, still actually having a difficult time getting over the past, still having a difficult time cooperating, like what, for instance, Europe did in the past of World War II, actually benefit hugely from having strong symbols. Take, for instance, the 1954 World Cup. Germany, a defeated nation, not entirely sure of its place in New Europe, suddenly had this idea like, hey, we are actually a nation that matters. Suddenly, they were comfortable with actually moving along, moving ahead, and forgetting leaving the past behind, and building new, strong, overarching European institutions. And we believe that this is exactly why you need this fundamental national symbol. So, because basically what we say is the EU worked exactly because of this national identity, because there was a strong identity, because no one actually felt cowed or bullied or humiliated in doing something that they didn't want by other more powerful identities, such as the Germans would have felt if they hadn't had this new strong identity. So basically we want to prevent the cornered animal identity by actually having all the animal spirits run free and choose their own national identity and choose their own strong identity. So to the last point, closure. Because it's really too bad that Yugoslavia has gone. Really it is. It was a nice idea for all these people to work together. But it is. I mean, this is simply the reality that we have to face. And we believe that it's much, much better to actually make this new reality function And to make this new reality function, we have to have these symbols. We have to have this glue. We have to have this national identity that is so important to actually have this sense of identity, sense of belonging, that will make people want to move forward because they feel comfortable, they feel strong, they feel happy about where they belong, and they are willing to listen to the other side, willing to overcome old hatreds, willing to overcome the idea that the other party is actually worse than you or trying to bully you, do anything like that. And what Proposition is trying to create this idea of a zombie nationality for a state that doesn't exist anymore and doesn't actually relate to any existing identity. Because all you achieve in that way is prevent closure from this very, very painful past. So because we believe that you should not destroy national symbols, because these national symbols are important for moving on in the future and moving away from your painful past, but because the past is the past and we should leave it behind, we beg you to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd like to call upon the final speaker for the government.
Thank you, Honorable Judge, worthy opponents. It's been an honor to be in here today. I just want to point that out. I'm also going to point out I don't know much about sports. I don't know much about the Yugoslav Republic. I don't know much about today's republics. But I do know a couple of things. That it does take unity to provide winning, and it does, in order to feel united, you need to be winning. In order to feel united, you have to have some cultural ties. In order to have some cultural ties, you have to have some common history. And as far as side government goes, I think all these things are in the mix, and all these ingredients are right there. As much as side opposition wants to relive the war that they had a couple of years ago, we're here to go a couple of steps forward and tell you, well, guess what? These are things we have to put behind us. Because if we want to do something great as far as our athletic teams go, this is the first step to do it. And when athletic teams can do these things first, it's a myriad of options that they can do afterwards once they establish that, you know what, if we play together well in the field, maybe we play together economically, maybe we play together well militarily, I don't know what. But that's a whole different debate that I'm not going to get into because I'm probably going to lose. So I've written down a couple of rebuts, from the previous speaker. And the one that kind of struck me the most was we have this zombie nationality and that we're going to revive this zombie nationality. Simultaneously, though, the same previous speaker tells us they need closure. It's been 13 years, but they need closure, these people, and they don't want to do any of this, but it's a zombie nationality. These are two notions I don't understand. So it's something that happened a long time ago. It's an old nationality. We don't want to go back. We don't really remember it because it's a zombie. It's dead. But at the same time, it's so vivid in our imagination that we're willing to go to war again, as far as I understand, over football teams, something that I've never seen before. Now, I've narrowed this down into three main questions. I usually do that. The first one being, is there a Yugoslav identity? And I think that's pivotal to this debate today. The second one being, do sports unite people? And thirdly, and most importantly, what does this mean to the future of the Yugoslav Republic, kind of people, nations that used to live there? So, I'll move on. Is there a Yugoslav identity? We heard today from side opposition, no, there's no such thing as a Yugoslav identity today. This is something that we kind of feel, it's an abstract notion. They did acknowledge, though, that they have cultural ties, very similar histories. From what I remember, it's from, 1944, 1945, all the way to 1991. And that's a really long time if you ask me to be living together with someone. So that's not something you really forget. But they tell us, if we have a common football team, we're all going to fight. And what do they tell us? How are we going to fight? Because we're going to have a weird song that maybe not everyone likes. We might not have a flag that everyone likes, or there might be a couple of Serbian football players or a couple of more, Slovenian basketball players more on the field. I'm going to tell you something that I remember as a kid. I remember my father telling me that, you know what, Chris, the best basketball team in Europe and the best basketball team Europe has ever seen is a Yugoslav basketball team. And I thought that was kind of amazing. And I hate basketball, but I still remember this today. So I'm going to come out and say, well, if I remember this to this day, what does this mean to Yugoslav people who lately haven't been doing so well athletically? Isn't this Yugoslav identity going to come up and kind of unite these people? They've got cultural ties, I know that much. Their languages sound alike. I don't understand what they're saying, but I can see them talking to each other. They have the same food. I mean, I love the food. They've got very similar religion as far as I understand. But they still feel that they're going to lose their identity. Well, what identity are they going to lose if they say I share so much of it? I hope they don't lose it because they all kind of share the same one. And I'm going to come up and say, well, in the United States, I know this is a very far-fetched example, but it's a bunch of 50 states, you know? But when they go to the Olympics, they go under the same flag. And, you know, when Texans see New Yorkers play, we're not like, oh, well, damn them Yankees, they're going to go down. No one's doing that. We're saying, well, go, America, go, go, go. And what we're saying is that this is the exact same thing that's going to happen to the Yugoslav identity and to how this team is going to perform. They're insisting that you're going to do bad. And they even gave us an example of the European Union. And I'm Greek. And I'm going to tell you something. They've been paying our loans all this time. I think that's the best idea of cultural unity. Now, moving on to my second question, I've kind of already touched it a bit. Do sports unite people? And I'm going to say yes, they do. Even sometimes when you're not of the same country, when you're not of the same idea, they unite even if it's your enemy. And again, I'm going to give you an example. If Greece goes and plays football and they lose, but Turkey's still playing football, the Greeks are still rooting for the Turkish team. And we have a lot in common, and a lot of that commonalities have to do with the fact that we were at war for so many years. And if you can do this for your enemy at such a large extent, I'm willing to say that the Yugoslav former nations can do this with each other. Moving on then, and this is something that's been already heard. You do play for your team and not your country. Because they came out and said, well, the players aren't going to pass the ball because the other guy's a Serb. I've never heard of this in my life. You're going there to win. And if you're not going to go there to win, you're going to be out of the national team. So you have to pass the ball. You have to give the basket because this just doesn't make sense. In other words, their entire case is based on little practicalities of he might pass the ball, he might not like the song, and that flag that they're going to have there is not going to be very, very pretty. Go.
Do you think that it's useful in international organizations and international cooperation to have strong national identity so that the players involved know what they stand for, know what they're struggling for, know what they're negotiating for?
Players stand for what they do, and they stand for winning. And when you play for something that would be something as a Yugoslav identity, you stand for a lot more than playing for Serbia. You stand for a lot more than playing for let's say, Slovenia. You stand for playing for something a lot bigger than what you are. And that's going to be my answer to that. Now, what they've told us, do sports unite people? No. That's exactly why Yugoslavia broke up. I don't know your history, ladies and gentlemen, but I am very sure that you did not break up over sports. I am sure you did not break up because someone lost a goal. I'd like to believe the problems are a lot bigger, and they're so much bigger that sports are so much smaller that you're willing to unite over these things, and you're willing to play over these things precisely because you're going to win. And when you start winning, you're going to say, well, you know what? Our Yugoslav team kicks ass, and that's what I want to see doing. I want to see people winning, and winning unites, not losing. Now, moving on into my third question, how much time do I have? Exactly, all right. Now, what does this mean for the future of these republics? And now, this is going to be our main point. It means that financially, this is going to be a great idea. And why is this very, very important? Because as far as I know, financially, not everyone over here is doing very, very well. Now, I'm not one to really point fingers, but still, I don't think you're doing very, very well. And what does sports do? It's going to give you a whole new image. The moment that this team starts winning and starts doing well, the Europeans, the Americans, NATO, the United Nations, they're going to be like, wow, these people were at war 13 years ago, and they're playing sports together today under the same team name. That is damn amazing. And you know what? That probably means that you guys are ready for a lot more than that. You're ready to go out into the European Union. You're ready for some investment. You have new stability that you had not before. Because before you had war. People still remember war. When I told my mother I'm coming to Serbia, she's like, oh, no, you're not going there. You know what goes on over there? And I do know what goes on over here. There's unity. And there's people that like each other. There's people that talk the same languages. So in other words, they're telling you that war had this bad image and destroyed their nations and destroyed their unity. We're going to tell you that financially, this is the best thing you can do for yourself. For money, for fields, for European Union integration, for tourism. Please unite your team, and I'm going to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd like to call upon the final speaker for the opposition.
Dear people, Yugoslavia's gone. Get over it, finally. Seriously, you need to move on. at one point, you need to have a new identity which is powerful. And although I acknowledge that a purely Croatian identity, a purely Serbian, might instir conflict, you can have a second identity. Why not this being an EU identity, which is directed forward, which is more powerful, which is actually something you can fill with good values rather than old reminiscences of a zombie nation which never worked. This zombie nation, which was basically a failed marriage held together by the patriarch named Tito, who tried to make it work. And once he was gone, the whole system basically crumbled. And you started arguing about where to go to dinner, where to go to holidays, who cleans the room, everything. And you started fighting. And what this government now is doing is say, yes, I know it was bad, but we want to meet once a week to discuss where we go to holiday. Why? This is raising the same issues again and again and again. And we believe for these reasons, you should finally stop thinking about this and move on. I do have a few points, though. One of them is what nationalism is good for, if it is a positive one. Secondly, what we meant with zombie nation. Thirdly, futile. And lastly, closure. So, what is nationalism good for? Well, nationalism can have bad instances, and we saw this happening when the war broke out in Yugoslavia. Obviously, there was a lot of suffering, and obviously it still goes on. Some people from the proposition think Kosovo is not a big issue. I do believe for the people in Kosovo it is quite an issue, and for the people in Serbia it also is quite an issue. So the suffering is going on and on. What we explained to you was that we needed a new identity you can be proud of, identity where you don't feel suppressed, something you can live with every day, a positive identity. And those national identities are formed by symbols. We explained to you, this is a flag, this is an anthem. This can be a president, a parliament building like this one. But it can also be, and mostly is, a national sports team. It's a thing you can actually project your identity, your state on. We saw this in Germany. Michiel mentioned 1954, but also happened in 2006, when Germans were actually for the first time since the war raising German flags without feeling ashamed. This was done by football. Of course, you can argue, is it good the Germans raised the flags again? But they did it in a very peaceful way. So the German identity for Germans themselves was constructed in a very positive, peaceful, and European way, not a conflict way. So we think, in order to reach closure and to actually have a situation, which first Prof said, Victor said, we want to achieve communication on the same level. We want to have peace and closure in this region. This is our common goal. If we want to do this, we need actors who can be proud of themselves, who can sit at the table and talk to each other without feeling inferior. And one of those things you need for this is an identity which is strong and based in positive pride and not hatred towards the other guys. So what's happening? If you are reminded all the time of your Yugoslavian past, you can never really reach closure. This is why we named it a zombie nation. A zombie nation is obviously dead, a dead body that returns all the time and haunts you. You dream about it, you can never get rid of it, and it always plays an important role. So if we do have this zombie nation and it haunts us, we can never say we are now a good identity. If, for example, we have a football team, a Yugoslavian football team, and it has no player from Kosovo because they don't have good football camps, do we think that the Kosovars are really supporting it, the Yugoslavian football team? Do we think if we, for example, forced in Great Britain that they had a unified football team and there would be Ryan Giggs has finished his career and there would be no Welsh player, do the Welsh feel represented? Do the Northern Irish feel represented if nobody is playing there? Is that the case? I do believe that they do feel alienated if they don't have one very, very important thing like sports teams.
Sir.
Yes, please.
Why would they be reminded of a very horrible past when this team starts winning games?
Well, it starts winning games with individual players, firstly. Secondly, you have a flag, you have an anthem. You feel like a Croat, and you are forced to feel like a Yugoslavian again. Nika said it very, very nicely, that we do have things, if you ask Croats, that they feel more like Eskimo than as a Serb or a Yugoslavian, for example. We don't think that it is needed to have this additional identity, this Yugoslavian identity. You don't need to get it out. If you have a Yugoslavian football team, which is called Former Yugoslavian Football Team of Region Around, short FIFTOR, whatever name you can imagine, you are always reminded. I mean, Jure said it, that he remembers when Yugoslavia scored a goal and everyone was partying. You get reminded of Yugoslavia all the time. You get reminded why it failed. You get reminded what was at fault. So what is better? What is a situation we actually want to have? Nika said they want to give them a common football team. We framed it differently. We say we want to take away one very national symbol. This is what they do. They take it away. They take it away from everyone, Serbs, Croats, and everyone. Nobody gets something, but everyone gets taken something away, something which is actually important. Nika also mentioned the symbols for Kosovo, for example. The sports team would be important. Why do they want this? What do you think? Do they want this because it is missing on their card list? Or do they want this because they want to cheer for a team? Even if the team is losing, you can cheer for it. I'm a football fan of a 4th league team, and God, it's losing a lot. But still it's fun to be in the stadium and fun to be with friends. If you have this culmination point where you can feel as a Kosovar and develop that nationality, you can maybe have an identity where you at one point stop hating surrounding nations, can actually just rest in pride. This is where we go to closure. Because communication on the same level is only possible when the family members of this failed marriage actually have something of their own, have found a new partner, a new job, and meet each other in the restaurant, and they are all equal and they're all doing well, and they do not have to argue about where to go to holiday. They can actually do something. And Jure said it, it's possible, when he said that Croats are going to Serbia and win tournaments and everyone is happy. Apparently it's working. And you said it as well, that you cheer for the Turks and the other way around. Why cannot Serbs cheer for Croats and Croats cheer for Serbs? Why do you would have to have a common Turkish-Greek football team to prove your point, and not prove your point by saying you cheer for Turks or cheer for Greeks? So we see this is possible, and we see that we should actually go there. We should have something which is directed at the future and not loaded with negative memories, yes, with negative memories of suffering and of conflict. If we can reach a state where we have several football teams that are not as brilliant, and where we have national symbols of their own, and if you reach a situation where all of these people finally accepted the truth that Yugoslavia was a dream and it's over, it's gone, now we can go through Europe, can live in peace and can communicate on the same level, which is what they wanted in the first place. Thank you.
I want to thank all 8 speakers for their speeches. Can we give them all another round of applause?